Well, both the Prime Minister Scott Morrison and Treasurer Josh Frydenberg have admitted that their much anticipated budget surplus is at risk following major economic impacts because of coronavirus. Joining me now to discuss this and more in the world of economics, Herald Sun finance writer Terry McCrann, here with me in Melbourne, and the Australian's economics editor Adam Crichton in Sydney. Let's start, Terry, with the surplus that we haven't yet had, that we had the T-shirts printed and the mugs labelled, and it was pronounced at a great height last year.
Well,
are we being prepared for the shock here that won't eventuate on Tuesday, the 12th of May, or do you really think it's in peril?
Well, I think it is in peril, obviously. It's not just the coronavirus, it's the bushfires. And probably the bushfires more immediately in terms of the direct impact on the economy up front. I think both Adam and I would agree, though, that whether it's a $5 billion surplus or a $5 billion deficit, it's a rounding error. It's, you know, in the scheme of things, it's insignificant. But obviously, politically, in terms of that symbolic, this is the first surplus since the last Costello surplus. I think it will be damaging to the government. I don't see it as seriously damaging either in political or in economic terms. And the reality, what I would be worried about is if the government embarked on a replay what happened in the post-2008 period, where it went into a dramatic binge, either cutting taxes or spending, which locked in seriously big deficits going forward. Because the final point, the big thing about the coronavirus is that nothing the government does could directly offset the coronavirus. I mean, you can't make China restart its factories by spending money in Australia. That's the key issue in all this.
And that's probably the difference, isn't it, Adam, from where the bushfire risk is. You know, it's not just the money that needs to be outlaid to help people recover from the bushfires, it's the hit to the revenues coming in. That's a bit more predictable and can be modelled in Australia. A lot harder when it comes to such a difficult economy to not transparent economy as it is with China anyway. But I think the problem for the government here is a little bit of a morale issue and a brand issue, because they went out so strongly last year to say, you know, it's in the bag, it's coming our way, the first since 1989. I agree with Terry here, I don't think punters will mark the government down because the coalition's so strong in this area on economic management, but it's not a good look.
No, look, I think that's right. I don't think, I think the government will be fine politically. Everyone obviously knows there's been a coronavirus, there's been bushfires. You know, this isn't the government's fault per se. I think the political problem, though, will be just the generally weak performance of the economy. I wrote in the Australian today, I think that we're heading for a per capita recession. Actually, I think based on the construction figures that we saw today for the final quarter of last year, they were pretty poor, that we're actually probably already in a per capita recession right now, if you like. That means two successive quarters of shrinkage in the economy per person. And I think most of 2020, I think, is going to see that too, especially obviously this first quarter where the GDP of the economy will actually go into reverse in aggregate. Kind of whether or not we see that in the second quarter as well, we still don't know. There are so many unknowns about the virus. And as you said earlier, it is just so hard to predict the damage. The Reserve Bank put that figure of 0.2 percentage points of GDP on the bushfires, but they've certainly been reluctant to say anything about the coronavirus specifically. We'll hear more from Phil, of course, next week with the board meeting. He may actually put a figure on it.
All right, Terry, what about Australian companies? We know obviously about the students coming in from overseas, the exposure of our university sector, warned for a long time about this, but here we are. What's been the share market hit here, but what's been the impact to companies?
Well, very significant, obviously, and I think more broadly, Peter, it's a major wake-up call. We've put all our eggs basically in the China basket. When you look at the individual sectors like tourism, like the education sector, like property to a large extent, and property has been the great driver of what we regard as a good economy. And nobody knows how this coronavirus is going to play out, obviously, in health terms, but then obviously more importantly in this space in economic terms. And as Adam was saying, the economy was pretty sluggish coming into 2020, and on top of that you get the coronavirus. The bushfires will basically self-correct when the rebuilding kicks in. The coronavirus, we really don't know where this is going to play out and how long it's going to impact on the economy, but it has to be seriously negative through 2020.
It's worth.
Adam, you
Sorry,
know, Terry started off there just talking earlier about the government can't overcorrect here. It can't go down the stimulus path in the way that the Labor government did. I talked at the start of the show about, you know, $2 billion for the pink bats in, $2 billion to get them out, $16 billion on school halls,
Yes.
checks to dead people. I could do a whole show about the litany of panic and failure. Where does the government go to from here? I mean, I know there'll be pressure on ministers not to spend, but how does Josh Frydenberg put this budget together when so much is unknown?
Well, certainly the government should not embark on a spending spree. If I were the government, I'd bring forward those tax cuts, which are scheduled for 4 years' time. I think they're already legislated, so it'd be a relatively simple matter to bring them forward, and kind of that could be a stimulus and confidence-boosting measure. But I think you're quite right. I don't want to see the government kind of engage in any Rudd government like stimuluses. And actually, it's worth pointing out there's actually not a lot of statistical evidence that those sort of bursts of spending actually work anyway. Really, it's just like it's a bit of a kind of folk wisdom. But yeah, they should just sit pat, I think, and bring those tax cuts forward.
I mean, politics is still about timing, Terry, and right in the middle of all of this economic concern, and it's now, if it's permeating the stock market, it's certainly going to permeate Australian homes and households and small businesses come budget. This is a tough time for Labor to get out there and say, trust us, we've got a net zero emissions target by 2050, and we're not even going to cost it for you, and there'll be no great impact on the economy. People are not stupid.
Well, I agree, Peter, that the initial reaction, I think, certainly the bushfire period, was from the press gallery, as you might anticipate, was that this is terrible for Morrison. He didn't have an agenda, he didn't have a story, he wasn't able to handle the dynamic. I think it really that and the coronavirus coming on top rebounds even more so on the opposition, and because
Yes.
they are promoting policies which are in themselves so destructive, both medium and long term, to the economy. And if the government doesn't have an adequate response to the short term challenges, there's no faith in the opposition.
Yeah, and Labor, Adam's already got lead in its saddle on this issue. I mean, it can't attack the government over a surplus when we haven't seen a surplus from Labor since 1989.
Yeah, just on Labor's 2050 promise, I mean, of course it is fanciful. The one silver lining, perhaps, is that it might focus Labor's mind on the actual need to change its policy on nuclear energy to actually get there. I mean, if you are going to have zero emissions in 2050, you certainly cannot do it without nuclear power. That's what all the experts say. So it might change Labor's position.